Because when we look into let's take the swine industry, we can look at different companies, we can look at different areas and see what they've done to innovate. And they will have truly innovated because it stood the test of the marketplace. And that is a key feature in innovation.
Welcome to the Swine at Canada podcast. I am Dan Columbus, and I will be your host for today's episode. And with me, I have a returning guest. You were one of the first ones, Dr. Cordell Young, who is a partner and associate at Precision Veterinary Services. So welcome back to the show, Cordell.
Hey, thanks so much, Dan.
Yeah. So I know you've been on before, and people probably know you because you're working out in the industry, but I will ask you to kind of introduce yourself again. Let us know a little bit about your history before we get into the topic.
Sure. Yeah. So I am a partner in Precision Vet Services. We're one of the practices that are a part of the Swine Veterinary Partners group across Canada. So kind of a large collaboration of swine practices. So I've been practicing since 2017 when I graduated from the WCVM in swine. I've just had one or two sheep clients along the way, but primarily swine in Alberta and Saskatchewan, because I grew up in Saskatchewan, actually, so have some roots there. That's about it.
Short and sweet. You know, a lot of people have a circuitous route to get to the swine thing. You were very direct. So, I mean, that's
very direct.
So, I mean, that's great. We can move right into the topic today. I know you kind of mentioned you wanting to talk about innovation, and this is something we talk about a lot in the swine industry. I think we mentioned that we're innovative, we're resilient, and we're going to get into a little bit more specifically about where we are and are not in the swine industry. But you've been reading a book. And so a lot of this is based on the book, The 10 Types of Innovation. So maybe let's just start with talking about that. What got you into this book and what you kind of learned from it?
Yeah, right. And I almost feel bad because on the previous episode that I recorded with John Patience there, it was also a book review on the Checklist Manifesto. So it is a theme. I do like to do these book reviews, and actually, a part of the podcast is it just really helps solidify the topics and whatever. And I guess it gets back to a little bit of some kind of business coaching that we've had as a group that's tackled some Working Genius by Pat Lencioni, which I would highly recommend. If there's one way to transform an organization, it's with understanding Working Genius. And so, yeah, in kind of working through some of that, I came to realize my working geniuses are being an inventor and being an enabler, which is understanding and coming up with new things, and also the enabling piece is just helping and more of a service kind of based role. And so that's where this book came in. It's like that's clearly one of my strengths. I love inventing. I kind of polarized to inventing things. That's my natural state, and I want to learn more about it. And that's where this 10 types comes in.
Okay. So maybe let's get into, I don't know if we have time for do the 10 types, but maybe just a general overview of like what are the types of innovation kind of that it discusses and how those fit in with the swine industry.
Yeah. So, and maybe as a quick background to it, it's a group of business advisors that were trying to answer the question, how can we make innovation more successful? Because it often fails. And what they wanted to establish was looking at a ton of businesses, a ton of initiatives, what works, and then categorize those. So they're basically putting everything that they saw that worked as an innovation into a bucket, which are the 10 types. And there's kind of three subcategories. There's innovations in the business model. And there's kind of four there. Those would be the profit models, the networks, the structure, and the processes that the companies would work. Those are kind of background innovations that typically you wouldn't see from the outside. Then there's the offering, which is going to be the product performance and the product systems. in terms of how to integrate all of those. And then lastly, they've got the customer, the experience maybe category. And that's where we're talking about the service that is provided, and then the channels and the brand and the customer engagement that a product or service would get. So those are the 10 types. And really, every innovation that we have in a business or any initiative, we're going to be seeing innovations that fall in somewhere in those 10 categories. And it's really interesting to see this simplifies it. Rather than having a great big cloud of, we need to innovate something, now we need to innovate in our networking, or we need to innovate in our branding or our customer engagement, rather than just having an open whiteboard with Post-it notes that you end the day with nothing substantive. It really helps kind of categorize that.
Yeah, I think it could be interesting, because how many times do you see in a business's mission, we're going to be innovative? And it's like, okay, well, what does that mean? In what section, right? Like, how are you going to do that? And maybe the clarity would help actually, with having that innovation.
Exactly. And actually, so their definition of innovation is kind of interesting. It's the creation of a viable new offering, and realizing that there's very little that is new in terms of, well, in life, in general, in history and whatever. But it's actually just recreating things, finding things from different areas that have worked. I think the best example, we were talking about an airport that now has a valet service. They took the valet service from a hotel, and you pay $15 extra for parking, and they'll take you stop at the curb, they park your car, and they bring it back 20 minutes before your flight comes in. And brilliant. The hotel valet worked. Why wouldn't it work in an airport? So it's nothing new, but yet it's new, and it has to be viable, meaning in the marketplace, it will survive. And I think it's kind of neat to have those, because when we look into let's take the swine industry, we can look at different companies, we can look at different areas and see what they've done to innovate. And they will have truly innovated because it stood the test of the marketplace. And that is a key feature in innovation.
Yeah, I think that's actually really interesting to hear that definition, because I think a lot of people would have in their head, innovation means groundbreaking, never been seen before, like, oh my God, we're going to blow the socks off people, right? And this is not. It's like, it doesn't have to be new in the world, but it's new to you or your company or your process. And so you're bringing it in and applying it. So that kind of makes it a little bit easier almost to look at and bring in, because you're not trying to find that like brand new thing that you're going to introduce to the world.
Exactly. And actually in the book, they cover, as part of the understanding the topics better, they have actually innovation tactics for each type of innovation. They've got, here are some tactics, and I wrote them down because I couldn't remember them all. For each of the 10, there's at least 10 tactics. Some of them have like 20. So, and some of them that would be applicable to, let's say, the swine industry are on process. So company processes, or at the producer level, producer processes, implementing something like automation or standardization. We're the kings of standardizing what a farrowing room looks like. On a larger scale, Southwest Airlines, when they started in the industry, they bought only one model of plane for their entire fleet. And that's so that they only needed to hire and train pilots on a single airplane. Their staff all knew exactly what they were doing in every plane. Cleaning was absolutely standardized. And so the efficiencies that came about from that, it's really interesting. So that's one out of 15 tactics that you could use under process to innovate what you do, and so it's fascinating to see, okay, these are the group of researchers that wrote the book. When they're looking at every innovation and initiative that's been out there for the last 25 years, they've actually bucketed into particular tactics. And they're like, if you've heard of anything else, tell us, because these are all that we've come up with, but there might be more, and there certainly could be.
So you mentioned the one thing that we could do to be innovative or we do in the swine industry to be innovative. So I think let's delve a little bit more specifically into the swine.
Sure.
We are swine it, and so we should be
sure. That's what I was thinking.
The swine industry, yeah. So I guess we'll look into a little bit more, like in the different layers of the swine industry. Where have you seen innovation, and then maybe where have you not that we could potentially do a better job?
Right. Yeah. Great question. And probably I'll preface this with, I'm just a lowly pig vet from Southern Alberta. I know a little bit about the industry, and that might be overestimating, especially in like North America in general, or even the world. My perspective is pretty small, and I want to preface it there. But just looking at kind of what's around me, I think it's intrigued me of where we're strong. And in general, the swine industry, probably leading that is nutrition, genetics, and pharma on process and product performance. I think over time, over the last 20, 30 years in the swine industry, which I've only been in it for 7, but that product performance has been at the core. And I wouldn't say we've over innovated, but at some point there's the contrast of improving what exists and inventing the new, and we're at a point where we're pushing the limits of potentially even nature, like we are really on the cutting edge of what pigs can do and what they can produce. Which is amazing, but that it's been very strongly innovated. And then what we need to do is then pivot onto the other sectors, into the business model and the kind of the experience levels of it. So that has, I think, and would you agree from your end? Is that what your take has been?
Yeah, I mean, I'll preface it by, I know nutrition. I don't know the other side of it, but I would definitely agree with you there. With nutrition, it's almost like we're getting to the limits of a lot of things. And, I told people where it's like, 10, 20 years ago, you were expecting huge changes in feed efficiency and growth when you added this to the diet or you alter the diet. I'm like, we're talking about minute changes now, because we've identified so much of like, what is a nutrient requirement? What are the efficiencies? How do nutrients interact? Right? That it's like you're now making those incremental changes. It's like the iPhone, when they introduced fingerprinting and all this other stuff, and now we get a new iPhone and it's like, oh, you get a slightly better camera.
Exactly. That's a perfect example of just improving what exists, and that's where, I guess, innovation in general, just to blue sky for another minute or two, that's where innovation in general is really tough, because you're never done. The really groundbreaking innovation pieces, as soon as one is capitalized in the market, depending on the competitiveness of that marketplace, the minute somebody else is doing it, it's no longer innovation, right? It's becoming mainstream. It was initially innovative, but as soon as that's met, then we need to keep pushing for more innovation, right? And that's where talking about process and product performance and that level, really easy to kind of take away that innovative status to be matched or bettered by somebody else in the marketplace. And that's where then when we go and look, okay, where have we been mediocre? So in terms of profit model, that one's, well, in general production, I mean, commercial production in the swine industry, that's pretty small, pretty limited, right? Because the profit model is we sell pigs every week or every couple of weeks if they're in a batch or whatever, iso or out to finish, right? Mm-hmm. That profit model is pretty standard. But some producers understand and are able to do a niche marketing type of scenario. Obviously, that's not as easy to do commercially. But even the ability to manage the manure and sell that, create a profit out of that, great. If there would be a way to turn dead stock into the rendering process and capture something there, great. Or even the energy that would come from, let's say, biogas production or so on. I mean, those are all different profit models that could add on to a current swine operation type of thing, right? One that I think has been relatively strong in the industry side is service, actually, at different levels, whether that's the pharma, whether that's the nutritionists, or even like on the vet side. I think in general there has been pretty strong service components, but even customer engagement. I mean, we talk about the final consumer and what their take is on for pork, and how do we push pork consumption even domestically, and that I think we're often overwhelmed by the activists, right? And how quickly a negative opinion can be broadcasted and kind of overshadow any efforts there. And I wonder if there is an opportunity in the customer engagement part or area type of innovation, if there isn't room for engaging specifically with customers and saying, hey, we are getting feedback specifically from consumers of pork. We don't care about people that don't consume pork. We're interested in people that consume pork. And so if you're a consumer, let's have a conversation, And I think there's room to innovate that process that could do the industry as a whole good. And I think just looking at it, I almost wonder if there's kind of this mindset of, as an industry, we need to tackle that. So there's the industry class, maybe, but then there's the producer class. And how do we, on the individual level, those innovations could actually be quite profitable, in terms of catering to a direct market type of thing.
So you give one example of, dealing with the consumer and how to innovate. So I'm wondering, because you've read the 10 things and then the 10 or 20 things for each one, right? So maybe what is your opinion when you look at the different levels of the swine industry? What would be like a main kind of innovation tactic that you see would benefit those levels?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think actually, in general, it's interesting. Probably one of the most successful at the moment is, or one of the more profitable areas of the industry are those operations that have, in terms of, this would be a structural innovation. And really, it might not be looked at as an innovation, but if we see kind of the colony world, or producers that have other enterprises within their business, hogs and others, commodities, other farming, even down in the US, it seems like the mid-sized producers that are landowners, they're farming, they have the hogs, they can capture those synergies. Those innovations, we're actually seeing it now. Those are outperforming the large integrator side, right? It's that structural, but yet local leadership, local decision-making power that is actually, I would argue, taking the industry forward at the moment. That's my limited perspective from here, but that's a very big piece of it. Right.
I mean, that leads very well into the next question. So you mentioned, the activists and stuff like that. And you say, okay, we don't care about if you're not a pork, but we do. And, I'm thinking with innovation,
right. Yeah, we do.
And from the perspective of, there are going to be external forces that require the industry to innovate. And it might not be the way we want to go, but sometimes these are benefits. So I'm just wondering, like, your comments on that. I'm specifically talking, the greenhouse gas thing, antibiotics thing, right? Like, how many of these things that are a push, or maybe innovations that we would have seen because of that we might not have gone to if we didn't have those external forces.
And I think, you know what, not any real specifics on that particular topic of what we should focus on or whatever, but these industry forces, and that's where the importance of societal pressure actually is, and governing policies and so on. Because if you compare, we can't innovate in a vacuum. It has to be in the context of what the real world is doing. And when we look at, okay, even group sow housing coming along in 2029 in Canada, and certainly there are markets that prefer that currently. If we look at antibiotic usage and things like that, that's where we can take, and typically that would be I would say that's in the process type of innovation, where we go in and completely change the flow. If there's a way to, and I've been wondering about this the last few months, how could we change the typical swine production model to not enforce, but just inherently achieve the greatest health with the lowest risk of continued burden ongoing. And that would be a performance or a process type of innovation where we could address some of these concerns of antibiotic usage and stuff like that. So when these pressures come, what do? They open up room for innovation, really. And it's a matter of seeing where that gap will be and innovating on it now. That's kind of the approach that we should take to it.
It's kind of that seeing the silver lining, or you see the opportunity that then is going to set you apart and get ahead of it, versus, it seems very something where, the retailers that were able to get onto the e-tail very quickly in COVID are the ones that ended up surviving, and the ones that were a little bit slower. So it's not something that you wanted to do, but it allowed for you to have that success.
Exactly. And it's really what it is having the perspective, and it's important to emphasize that the culture of this in a team is determined. Culture in any team is determined by the leadership, right? In every case, the culture, let's say at the university, is determined by the leadership. The culture at a pig barn is determined by the leadership. In our practice, it's determined by the leadership. And so that's where there's a huge influence by leadership to create that culture of living in the future and approaching it actually as a team, because that's where the most benefit, most diversity of ideas comes from.
I think that's all great. We're getting close to the end of the time, so I guess I'll just give you the opportunity for one final message, or if there's something we've missed that you kind of want to really get out there. I mean, this is your opportunity.
I guess what it's really helped me to see, even as my inventing brain goes about its daily business, is to be more systematic about where improvement needs to be. Not only in identifying where it should be going, but also understanding my level of ambition, how much energy needs to go into this. And then just, we've got a framework to make innovation successful. And that is the only way forward, really, in a challenging marketplace.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I'm going to ask you the final three questions again. I know you've probably answered them before, but it's been a while, so maybe your answers will change.
It's time for our famous three. Swine Veterinary Partners comprises 4 well-established clinics across Canada: Precision Veterinary Services, Premier SHP, Demeter, Ontario, and Demeter, Quebec.
So again, our first question is, what is your favorite swine or agriculture-related resource?
I would say the AASV, on the ASV website, they've got a it's basically JSHAP and like the Journal of Swine Health and Production. But all the articles there that we can search, that's my go-to.
Yeah, makes sense. So our next one is a favorite book or resource outside of that. Maybe something not about the book that we just discussed in the whole episode. So a different one.
Well, it dovetails with this book. It's maybe my chief goal in life is jobs theory and understanding what the needs and what the jobs to be done are, and let's get them done. And that's Competing Against Luck. It is a wonderful book, just saying when we start businesses, let's not leave it to luck for success. Let's make sure that we understand the jobs to be done. Yeah, and it works well with innovation. It dovetails well.
I mean, the discussion today leads very well to our last question too, is like, when you look at successful producers or leaders, what is a characteristic that you think makes them successful? I mean, that might be innovation. Maybe you have a different answer for this.
You know what? I do have a different answer. Innovation is key, and understanding the need for change is key. And it goes back a little bit to the working genius in terms of first creating a cohesive team, a leader in any position. And that it goes right down to the pig producer level that understands how to connect and they understand how to understand their team and each individual on their team. That's the recipe. You need that before you can innovate. You absolutely have to have that before you can innovate.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's been great to have you back on. A very interesting discussion. I love the lively discussion that we had on this. And I'm definitely looking forward to your next book review episode when we have you on again. But thanks again for joining us.
Thank you again, Dan. Really appreciate it.